The wind howled outside the frost-covered windows of the Vermont retreat, but inside, the air was thick with secrets waiting to spill. I stood at the edge of the crowded common room, clutching a mug of lukewarm cider, my heart pounding like it was trying to break free. Lucas, my creative writing professor, was across the room, laughing with a group of students, but his eyes kept finding mine, each glance a spark in the dim light. My name is Alex, a 22-year-old non-binary student at Greenvale College, a small liberal arts school tucked in the rolling hills of upstate New York. I'd always been the quiet one, sketching stories in notebooks, hiding behind my auburn curls. This holiday retreat, a week-long escape for the creative writing department, was supposed to be a chance to workshop stories, sip hot cocoa, and bond with classmates. But for me, it was something else entirely. A chance to be near Lucas. Lucas Bennett, 35, was the kind of professor who made you want to write until your fingers bled. Tall, with a runner's build and dark hair that always looked slightly mussed. He had this way of seeing through you. Not in a creepy way, but like he could read the words you hadn't yet dared to write. He'd been my advisor for 2 semesters, and somewhere between his late-night office hours and his notes in the margins of my stories, I'd fallen for him. Hard. It was reckless, impossible, and probably one-sided, but every time he smiled at me, I felt like I could rewrite the stars. The retreat was held at Pinewood Lodge, a sprawling cabin nestled against a frozen lake, surrounded by snow-draped pines. 30 students and 3 professors filled the space with laughter, debates, and the clatter of laptops. By day 3, the group had splintered into cliques. The poets in one corner, the sci-fi nerds in another, and me, hovering on the edges, watching Lucas like he was the only story that mattered. That night, as the group planned a midnight hike, I slipped outside to the porch for air. The cold bit at my cheeks, and I tugged my green parka tighter. The lake stretched out before me, a sheet of ice reflecting the stars. I was scribbling in my notebook, some half-formed poem about longing, when I heard the creak of boots on the wooden steps. "Mind if I join you?" Lucas's voice was soft, like he didn't want to shatter the quiet. I froze, my pen hovering over the page. Sure. It's peaceful out here." He leaned against the railing, his navy coat dusted with snow. "You've been quiet this week, Alex. Everything okay?" I shrugged, my breath clouding in the air. "Just processing. This place makes you think too much." He chuckled, and the sound warmed me more than it should have. "That's what retreats are for, stirring up the soul." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "What's stirring in yours?" The question caught me off guard, like a hook sinking into my chest. I wanted to tell him everything. How his voice made my heart race. How I'd written a dozen stories about a professor who loved a student against all odds. But I couldn't. He was my teacher. There were rules, boundaries, a whole world between us. Instead, I said, "I'm just trying to figure out who I am in all this noise." He nodded like he understood more than I'd said. "You're braver than you think, Alex. Your stories, they're raw, real. You don't hide from the hard stuff." I laughed, bitter. "I hide from plenty." He tilted his head, his gaze steady. "Not from me." My heart stopped. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. He took a step closer, and I could smell his cedarwood cologne, see the faint stubble on his jaw. I wanted to run, to stay, to scream. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as he reached out and gently took my hand. His touch was warm, grounding, and utterly terrifying. "Alex," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see you, and I'm not supposed to, but I do." The world tilted. I stared at our joined hands, his fingers calloused from years of holding pens, mine trembling like they might shatter. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not with him. But before I could pull away, he did something no one expected. Not even me. He leaned in and kissed me. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like he was giving me a chance to pull back. But I didn't. I leaned into it, my hands finding his coat, clutching the fabric as if it could anchor me. The world melted away, the cold, the retreat, the rules. There was only Lucas, his lips warm against mine, his breath mingling with my own. When we broke apart, his eyes were wide, like he'd surprised himself as much as me. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping back. "I shouldn't have." "Don't." I cut him off, my voice shaking. "Don't say that." He ran a hand through his hair, his face a storm of guilt and want. "Alex, it's complicated. I'm your professor. If anyone saw, let them," I said, braver than I felt. "I don't care." But he shook his head, his jaw tight. "You don't understand. This could ruin everything for both of us." Before I could argue, the porch door swung open, and a voice called out, "Lucas? Alex? You guys out here?" It was Sarah, a senior and the unofficial queen of the poetry clique. She froze, her eyes darting between us, sensing the tension. We're heading out for the hike. You coming?" Lucas stepped back, his hand slipping from mine. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "We'll be there." Sarah hesitated, then nodded and disappeared back inside. The moment was gone, shattered like ice underfoot. Lucas looked at me, his eyes pleading. "We need to talk. Later. Okay?" I nodded, my throat tight. As he walked away, I touched my lips, still tingling from his kiss. The retreat was supposed to be an escape, but I just stepped into a story I wasn't sure I could write. The hike was a blur of snow and laughter, but I barely noticed. My mind was stuck on that kiss, on the way Lucas's eyes had held mine. By the time we returned to the lodge, the other students were buzzing with energy, but Lucas avoided me, sticking to the professor's table at breakfast. I tried to focus on my writing workshop, but my pen felt heavy, my words hollow. That afternoon, I found him in the library, a cozy room lined with books and warmed by a crackling fire. He was grading papers, his glasses perched on his nose. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding. "We need to talk," I said, echoing his words from the night before. He looked up, his expression guarded. "Alex, last night was a mistake." The words hit like a punch. "A mistake." I stepped closer, my voice low. "You kissed me. You said you see me." "I do," he said, his voice breaking. "But this can't happen. I could lose my job. You could get kicked out. It's not just about us." I crossed my arms, anger flaring. "So what? We pretend it didn't happen?" "I can't do that, Lucas." He stood, pacing the room. "I don't want to pretend, but we have to be careful. This retreat, it's not the real world. Out there, people won't understand." I wanted to scream that I didn't care what people thought, but deep down, I knew he was right. The world wasn't kind to stories like ours. Still, I couldn't let it go. Not now. "Then what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He stopped pacing, his eyes softening. "We take it one step at a time, and we don't let anyone else write our story." For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end, just the beginning of something messy, beautiful, and worth fighting for. The fire in the library crackled, casting shadows that danced across Lucas's face as he stood there, his words hanging between us like fragile glass. One step at a time. It sounded simple, but nothing about this felt simple. My heart was a tangle of hope and fear, and every glance from him made it harder to breathe. Over the next 2 days, we played a dangerous game of stolen moments. A brush of hands in the hallway, a shared smile during a workshop, a whispered conversation by the lake when no one was looking. Each moment was electric, but it came with a price. I caught Sarah watching us during a group discussion, her eyes narrowing like she was piecing together a puzzle. She wasn't the only one. The retreat was a pressure cooker, and gossip spread faster than the snow piling up outside. By day 5, the tension was unbearable. I was sitting in the dining hall, picking at a plate of roasted vegetables, when Lucas slid into the seat across from me. It was bold, too bold. Students weren't supposed to eat with professors unless it was a formal event, and the way his knee brushed mine under the table sent my pulse racing. "We need to be more careful," he said, his voice low, his fork poking at a piece of chicken like it had personally offended him. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "Then why are you sitting here?" He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because I can't stay away." My cheeks burned, and I glanced around, half expecting Sarah or someone else to be staring. Sure enough, Marcus, a junior with a knack for short stories and a louder mouth, was watching us from the next table. He raised an eyebrow, and I looked away, my stomach twisting. "Lucas," I said, barely above a whisper. "People are noticing." He sighed, setting down his fork. "I know, I'm trying, Alex, but every time I see you, I forget the rules." I wanted to reach for his hand, to tell him I felt the same, but the weight of the room pressed down on me. This wasn't just about us anymore. If word got out, it wouldn't just be whispers. It could be the end of his career, my scholarship, everything we'd worked for. That night, the retreat organizers planned a talent show, a cheesy tradition to lighten the mood. Students performed poetry, sang off-key covers, and even attempted a skit that had everyone laughing. I was supposed to read a short story, but my nerves were shot. Lucas was in the audience, his eyes locked on me as I took the stage, my hands trembling with the pages of my story. It was a piece I'd written for his class, about a kid who loved someone they shouldn't, set against the backdrop of a small town that didn't forgive. As I read, my voice grew stronger, the words pouring out like they'd been waiting for this moment. The room was silent, hanging on every word, and when I finished, the applause was deafening. Lucas stood, clapping longer than anyone else, his eyes shining with something that looked like pride. But as I stepped off the stage, Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me aside. "What's going on with you and Lucas?" she asked, her voice sharp. I froze, my mouth dry. "Nothing. He's my advisor. That's it." She crossed her arms, her blonde hair catching the light. "Don't lie to me, Alex. I saw you two on the porch. And today at dinner, you're not exactly subtle." My heart sank. "Sarah, please. It's not what you think." She raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it? Look, I don't care who you love, but this is a small school. People talk. And if Marcus or anyone else figures it out, you're both screwed." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the truth was too heavy. She was right. Lucas and I were playing with fire, and the flames were getting closer. Later that night, I found Lucas by the lake, the moonlight glinting off the ice. He was throwing pebbles, watching them skitter across the surface. I stepped beside him, my boots crunching in the snow. "Sarah knows," I said, my voice flat. He didn't look at me, just tossed another pebble. "What did she say?" "She warned me, said people are starting to notice." He cursed under his breath, his shoulders slumping. "I knew this would happen. I should have stayed away." "Don't say that," I snapped, grabbing his arm. "You don't get to kiss me and then act like it was nothing." He turned to me, his eyes dark with frustration. "It's not nothing, Alex. It's everything. That's the problem." We stood there, the cold biting at our skin, the silence heavy with all the things we couldn't say. Finally, he took my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "We need to figure this out, but not here, not with everyone watching." I nodded, my throat tight, Then where? When? After the retreat, he said. Back at Greenvale. We'll find a way. But as we stood there, hand in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The retreat was ending in 2 days, and with it, the fragile bubble we'd built. The real world was waiting, and it wasn't kind to stories like ours. The next morning, I woke to a commotion in the common room. Marcus was holding court, his voice loud enough to carry through the walls. I'm telling you, something's up with Lucas and Alex. I saw them by the lake last night. It's not normal. My blood ran cold. I stayed in my room, pretending to sleep, but the whispers followed me all day. By lunchtime, the mood in the lodge had shifted. Students glanced at me, then away. Professors avoided my eyes. Lucas kept his distance, but I could see the strain in his face, the way his hands clenched when he thought no one was looking. That afternoon, during a workshop, Professor Elena, a stern woman in her 50s who taught poetry, pulled me aside. Alex, she said, her voice clipped, we need to talk about your behavior. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? She adjusted her glasses, her eyes cold. There are rumors about you and Professor Bennett. I don't know if they're true, but they're serious. You need to be careful. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that love shouldn't be a scandal. But I just nodded, my face burning, and walked away. The retreat was supposed to be a sanctuary, but it was starting to feel like a trap. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, staring at the snow, my mind racing. Lucas and I had crossed a line, and now the consequences were closing in. But even as fear gnawed at me, I couldn't regret that kiss. It had been real, raw, and worth every risk. The snow fell heavier that night, blanketing Pinewood Lodge in a silence that felt like a held breath. I sat on my bed, my notebook open but untouched, the weight of Professor Elena's words pressing down on me. Lucas was somewhere in the lodge, probably wrestling with the same fears, but we hadn't spoken since the lake. The distance between us felt like a chasm now, and I didn't know how to cross it. The next morning, the retreat's final full day, was supposed to be a celebration. A bonfire was planned by the lake, complete with mores and storytelling. But the air in the lodge was thick with tension. Marcus's rumors had spread like wildfire, and I could feel eyes on me everywhere. Classmates whispering behind their hands, professors exchanging glances. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the snow and never come back. At breakfast, I sat alone, picking at a muffin, when Sarah slid into the seat beside me. You okay? She asked, her voice softer than before. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. She sighed, pushing a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Look, I didn't mean to scare you yesterday. I've seen what happens when stuff like this gets out. It's not pretty. I know, I said, my voice barely audible. But I don't know how to stop it. She leaned closer, her eyes serious. You don't. You just survive it. But if you and Lucas are serious, you need to be ready for the fallout. Her words stuck with me all day, a warning I couldn't shake. By evening, as the group gathered for the bonfire, I was a wreck. The lake glowed orange under the firelight, and students laughed and roasted marshmallows. But I felt like an outsider in my own story. Lucas was there, standing with Professor Elena and another faculty member, his face unreadable. I wanted to run to him, to demand answers, but I stayed rooted to my spot, clutching a stick with a half-burned marshmallow. As the night wore on, the group started sharing stories, ghost tales, funny anecdotes, heartfelt confessions. When it was my turn, I stood, my heart pounding. I hadn't planned to speak, but something in me snapped. I needed to take control, even if it was just for a moment. I wrote something new, I said, my voice trembling but clear. It's about love. The kind that scares you because it's real. The group fell silent, their faces lit by the flickering flames. Lucas's eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, it was just us. I pulled a crumpled page from my pocket and began to read. It's about a person who loved someone they shouldn't, I said, my voice growing stronger. Someone older, wiser, forbidden. They knew it was dangerous, but they couldn't stop. Because love doesn't care about rules. It doesn't care about what people think. It just is. As I read, I poured everything into it. Every stolen glance, every touch, every fear. The words were raw, unpolished, but they were mine. When I finished, the silence was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then slowly people clapped. Not everyone. Marcus and a few others stayed silent. But Sarah was beaming, and Lucas's eyes were shining with something I couldn't name. After the bonfire, as the group dispersed, Lucas caught my arm. That was incredible, he said, his voice low. You're incredible. I wanted to kiss him again, right there in front of everyone, but I didn't. Instead, I said, I meant every word. He nodded, his jaw tight. I know, and that's what scares me. Before I could respond, Professor Elena called him over, her expression stern. He gave me a look, half apology, half promise, and walked away. I stood there, the cold seeping into my bones, wondering if we'd ever get our chance. The next morning, the final day of the retreat, I woke to a note slipped under my door. It was in Lucas's handwriting, simple and direct. Meet me at the dock at sunrise. My heart raced as I pulled on my parka and boots. The lodge still quiet as I slipped outside. The sky was a soft pink, the lake glittering like a sheet of glass. Lucas was waiting at the dock, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his breath clouding in the air. I couldn't sleep, he said as I approached. I kept thinking about your story, about us. I stopped a few feet away, my heart pounding. And he stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. I don't know how to do this, Alex. I don't know how to be your professor and this, but I know I don't want to lose you. His words hit like a wave, washing away the fear. I reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. Then don't, I said. We'll figure it out. Together. For a moment, we just stood there, hand in hand, the world quiet around us. But the moment was fleeting. As the sun rose, casting golden light across the lake, I heard footsteps behind us. I turned to see Marcus, his phone in hand, his face twisted with something like triumph. I knew it, he said, his voice loud enough to carry. You two are done. Lucas dropped my hand, his face paling. Marcus, you don't understand. I understand enough, Marcus snapped, already typing on his phone. This is going viral. Panic surged through me, but Lucas stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Do what you have to do, Marcus. But this isn't your story to tell. Marcus hesitated, then stormed off, leaving us alone again. But the damage was done. The retreat was ending, and the real world was waiting. A world that wouldn't forgive us easily. As we walked back to the lodge, Lucas took my hand again, his grip tight. Whatever happens, he said, we face it together. I nodded, my heart heavy but resolute. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like I wasn't walking it alone. The bus ride back to Greenvale was suffocating. Students whispered, their eyes darting toward me and Lucas, who sat at opposite ends of the bus. Marcus hadn't wasted time. By the time we boarded, half the group was glued to their phones, no doubt spreading his version of the story. I kept my head down, my earbuds in, but the music couldn't drown out the dread pooling in my stomach. Back on campus, the rumors exploded. By Monday morning, my inbox was flooded with messages. Some curious, some cruel. Is it true? One classmate asked. "You're disgusting," another wrote. I deleted them all, but each one felt like a cut. Lucas wasn't in his office when I checked, and his classes were canceled for the day. The silence from him was worse than the gossip. Sarah found me in the library that afternoon, her face grim. "It's bad," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Marcus posted screenshots of texts he sent to the dean. He's calling for Lucas to be fired." My heart sank. "What about me?" She hesitated. "They're talking about academic probation. Maybe worse." I buried my face in my hands, the weight of it all crashing down. This wasn't just about love anymore, it was about survival. I'd known the risks, but I hadn't expected it to unravel so fast, so brutally. That evening, I went to Lucas's apartment, a small place off campus with books stacked on every surface. He opened the door, his face haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. "Alex," he said, pulling me inside. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "Like what?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Like you're giving up?" He sighed, sinking onto the couch. "The dean called. They're launching an investigation. I might be suspended by the end of the week." I sat beside him, my hands shaking. "And what about us?" He looked at me, his eyes raw. "I don't know. I want to fight for this, but I can't let you get hurt. If you lose your scholarship—" "I don't care about the scholarship," I snapped. "I care about you." He reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. "I care about you too. That's why this is killing me." We sat in silence, the weight of the world pressing down. Then he pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me, and for a moment, I let myself believe we could weather the storm. But the moment was fleeting. A knock at the door made us both jump, and when Lucas opened it, Professor Elena stood there, her face like stone. "We need to talk," she said, her eyes flicking to me. "Alone." I left, my heart pounding, and waited in the hallway, straining to hear their voices. When Lucas emerged, his face was pale. "They're moving faster than I thought," he said. "The dean wants a meeting tomorrow, with both of us." The next day, we sat in the dean's office, a sterile room with 2 bright lights. Dean Harper, a man in his 60s with a permanent frown, didn't mince words. "This is a serious breach of ethics," he said, his eyes cold. "Professor Bennett, you've abused your position. And Alex, your involvement jeopardizes your academic standing." I wanted to scream that it wasn't abuse, that it was love, but Lucas spoke first. "I take full responsibility," he said, his voice steady. "Alex did nothing wrong. If anyone should face consequences, it's me." My heart broke at his words. He was trying to protect me, but it felt like he was slipping away. The dean leaned back, his fingers steepled. "We'll need to review this further. For now, Professor Bennett, you're suspended. Alex, you're on probation pending the investigation." As we left the office, Lucas grabbed my hand, pulling me into a quiet corner of the hallway. "I'm not giving up," he said, his voice fierce. "But you need to decide what you want. This could ruin you." "I want you," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "I don't care what it costs." He kissed my forehead, his lips lingering. "Then we fight. Together." The next week was a blur of meetings, whispers, and sleepless nights. Lucas was barred from campus, and I was drowning in coursework and judgment. But we found ways to stay connected: late-night calls, secret meetings at a coffee shop outside town. Each moment with him was a lifeline, a reminder that we were worth fighting for. One night, as we sat in his car, the rain pounding against the windows, he told me about his past. He'd grown up in a small town, hiding who he was until college, when he'd fallen for a man who broke his heart. "I swore I'd never let myself feel that way again," he said, his voice raw. "But then I met you." I leaned across the console, kissing him softly. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. No matter what. But the world had other plans. The investigation dragged on and the pressure mounted. Classmates stopped talking to me, and my grades started to slip. Sarah was my only ally, sneaking me notes from Lucas's classes, telling me to hang on. But it was hard to see the light when everything felt so dark. Then, one afternoon, I got an email from the dean's office. The investigation was complete. They'd made their decision. The email was cold, clinical, like a knife wrapped in bureaucracy. The dean's decision was final. Lucas was fired, effective immediately. I was allowed to stay at Greenvale, but my scholarship was revoked, and I'd remain on academic probation for the semester. I read the words over and over, my hands shaking, until they blurred into nothing. I found Lucas at his apartment, packing books into boxes. The sight of him, his life reduced to cardboard and tape, made my chest ache. "They can't do this," I said, my voice breaking. "You're the best teacher they've got." He set down a book, his eyes tired but warm. "It's done, Alex. But I'm not done. Not with you." I crossed the room, throwing my arms around him. "What do we do now?" He held me tight, his breath warm against my hair. "We start over. Somewhere new. Together." It wasn't that simple, of course. I had to finish the semester, scraping by with loans and a part-time job at a bookstore. Lucas found work tutoring online, but the loss of his career left scars. We moved slowly, carefully, building a life in the cracks of the world's judgment. We rented a tiny apartment in Boston, a city big enough to lose ourselves in, and started to heal. Sarah visited us that summer, her eyes wide as she took in our cluttered, cozy space. "You guys did it," she said, grinning. "You made it work." "It's not perfect," I admitted, glancing at Lucas, who was cooking dinner in our tiny kitchen. "But it's ours." She hugged me, her voice soft. "You're braver than I thought." The world didn't change overnight. There were still whispers, still judgment. But there were also allies, friends who stood by us, strangers who smiled instead of stared. Lucas started writing again, his stories raw and honest, and I found my voice too, publishing a collection of essays about love and resilience. One night, as we sat on our balcony, the city lights twinkling below, Lucas took my hand. "I never expected this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I kissed you at the retreat, I thought I was ruining everything. But you saved me." I leaned against him, my heart full. We saved each other. Our story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, painful, and real, but it was ours, and that was enough. The holiday retreat had been the spark, the moment that changed everything. And though the world tried to tear us apart, we held on, proving that love, real, raw, defiant love, could write its own ending.